Welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. I'm your host. My guest today, Victor Echevarria. How are you doing?
Echevarria, but quite good.
Kidding. So I spent like an hour, like a long time working on this because I've called you Victor Echevarria forever. Because I never say your last name.
So the etymology of the name, and this has nothing to do with the subject of the podcast, but I find it interesting. It's from northern Spain. It's a Basque name, and it's a very common Basque name. Like you go to the Basque country in northern Spain, and it's like Smith. But
Really?
Here, nobody knows how to pronounce it. Nobody knows how to spell it. So I'm very comfortable with hey, listen, this is how it's pronounced.
Oh, man. I had Antonio Garcia Martinez on, and that one took me a while. Because those names aren't English names, and they all kind of sound like first names. So I was like, I'm going to get the order wrong.
Yep.
And I screwed up yours.
No
Anyway, Victor is the founder and CEO of Remedy Labs, was at TaskRabbit and founded Frenting, and went to Harvard Business School.
That's right.
So one of the questions I always, did you go to Harvard or Stanford or Princeton? So for Harvard, quite a stretch to make it to Silicon Valley. So
So I graduated in 2008, and that was around the time when I think they really made a concerted effort to try and become a stronger feeder into the Silicon Valley. And so there were a lot of people in my class who ended up being very successful. Scott Belsky with Behance.
Oh, yeah.
Victoria Ransom with Wildfire.
Right.
There was lots of good. David Vivero with Rent Juice, which got sold to Zillow, and now he started Amino. There's a lot of solid entrepreneurs that came out of there. And
so what did HBS kind of like? What was their? So what is the kind of the path from HBS to Silicon Valley? Like Stanford, I get it. You're here. Sun was started at your school, Google, all that. But Harvard, don't you have a bunch of guys who are the hedge funds are calling, and Goldman Sachs is calling, and McKinsey's calling? Like, how does that path work to Silicon Valley?
There is still that, but the graduating class from HBS is 900 people. I think it's still the case. So you have just a much larger pool of individuals that are eligible for this kind of stuff, and everybody is super type A. So you have a lot of people going in now that there's a reputation for good companies, good entrepreneurs coming out of HBS. You have a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs applying.
Yeah.
And part of what they spend time doing there is actually incubating their idea.
Yeah.
There's tons of opportunities to do field studies, or tons of opportunities to make connections with alumni.
Right.
And, they're just taking every opportunity to do it. And those are the successful companies I see.
Well, and I imagine it was just killing them too. Yeah. Like you can go to Wall Street and make, $10 million a year or whatever. But Mark Zuckerberg made $25 billion, and he makes $10 million every couple of weeks. And there's like some point where you must just kill some of those guys and be like, wait a minute.
That's a trap that I hope people stop getting into. Is this? I'm going to go chase the $25 billion outcome. And that's kind of a myth that's perpetuated by the venture industry here. I mean, everybody's looking for unicorns. Everybody's looking for fast growth. And so they are naturally fostering a culture of go build a company that's going to provide 10x returns in 4 years.
Yeah.
That is not how most successful businesses are founded, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get to $10 to $100 million in revenue, which is peanuts to a lot of venture capital firms that are looking for multiple billions of dollars of return in short order. So my hope is that that more innovation here is focused on building sustainable businesses from day one, like finding real revenue models, building a real business so that you don't have to take a ton of money from venture capitalists to scale, and so that you're not trapped in this this outcome of I'm going to make $1 billion or I'm going to make zero.
Well, it's funny. It's not the same guy. Like the guy at Harvard Business School, Kellogg, whatever, who's like, I want to be rich. You can kind of work that out on Wall Street. Like you can plot a course and get a bonus and fight for the bonus and all that. It's pretty hard to plot that out. And so like, that's not what Mark Zuckerberg did. He's not like, he was like, when he moved out here, he had another company called Wirehog that was more like Napster. He was kind of focused on that. He was maybe going back to school. Like he wasn't out to be that guy. And now he's that. So if you're the guy who's like, I need to be that guy, you almost can't get there. You can get there on Wall Street. You can get there, McKinsey, but it's pretty hard to get there.
There's a formula for getting rich. Right?
Yeah, right.
Go work for an investment bank. Go work for a consulting firm. And, they also have a pretty good track record of, hey, come and work here for a few years, and then we're going to turn you into a solid contributor in operations, and in the meantime, we're going to make you a bunch of money. And I know a ton of entrepreneurs that subsisted based on the fact that they made a bunch of money, and now they have a safety net.
Yeah.
And so that gives them a little bit more ability to actually grow a company versus sort of these young, hungry people that are living in garages and sleeping on floors. That's a much harder.
Although that's shifted. I mean, as I say this, maybe not for you, but when I first started doing startups, the entrepreneurs were a source of capital. Like they'd borrow money, credit cards, they'd not get paid, that kind of thing. I feel
that was me in my first company.
Yeah, we did that. And I think I did that a couple times. And now it's kind of like you can cobble enough money together that you can get 3 or 4 people working for, something, $80,000. I say that like that's a small amount of money. It's ridiculous. That's what Silicon Valley does to you. But for some amount of money, like where you're less typically where you're the source of capital.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple trends driving that. One, San Francisco is now a place that you can't afford to live on a shoestring budget. And 2, there's just been an explosion of seed capital. Right. So it's a lot easier to raise money when you're early, and you can raise a larger stake. You can raise a larger pot and afford to pay yourself a living wage.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I actually think is a good trend, because I think again, you're perpetuating this culture of the entrepreneur should be sacrificing everything to build these massive companies and generating tremendous returns for investors. I think a better, more healthy, symbiotic relationship is pay yourself a wage that doesn't cause you stress.
Yeah.
But also put your life's work into this.
I totally agree. I think, if you're the entrepreneur, and you're dealing with the bank account and all that, maybe you should put up with some stress and whatever. But for your engineer who's like trying to help you with your idea, and, she's a good, basically a good person, but she doesn't know if your startup's the one that's going to take over the world. The next one, she doesn't need to take a pay cut, or he doesn't need to take a pay cut for your, to follow your dream.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things that play into that as well. As a seed stage startup or even a Series A startup, you're never going to be able to compete just purely based on amount of money you can pay for your talent.
Yeah.
So the ones that succeed are the ones that have a very strong point of view. These companies have strong points of view. They have strong missions. And so you find people who are aligned with the mission, and that's just a better formula for success anyway. We haven't had problems finding really talented people at Remedy, because we have a strong point of view on medical bills are bankrupting people, and we're in the business of helping them.
Yeah.
And so people who could be getting, paid 10x what they get paid here at a seed stage startup.
It's funny. We did a big salary survey. Just all the venture capitalists we work with gave us their confidential data, and we that was our salary survey. Mm-hmm. And what we figured out was that all the salaries of startups are really bounded in this really small range. I'll try not to say the numbers because these numbers all sound big, but they're in this range. Just using numbers like 120,000 to 150,000 for an engineer.
Sounds right.
And what we found was if you're a small startup, you paid in that range because you didn't have a ton of money to compete with Google, and people understood that. And they don't expect to get paid $200,000 at a startup. But when you went to companies like Uber that were really hot, they also paid relatively low amounts because they were just using their name to get the number down. So everybody was keeping the numbers in this little range. And then you'd get like one guy would go to Google, some security guy who was like getting paid $800,000 a year. And so people would, conclude that, well, that's probably me. So I'm going to get that at a startup or Uber. And it's really not. I mean, it's as, Josh Hanna, right?
No, of course, yeah.
If this is smart, this is from Josh. And if this is wrong, I'm misinterpreting him. But he basically said, in Silicon Valley, it's people just way overestimate their probability of success. Mm-hmm. And a much more winning strategy, you work really hard, you don't get paid a lot, really. And, every 5 years, your options are worth, something happens and they're worth $150,000. He's like, much better to go to McKinsey, take your $250,000 bonus that you get every year and invest it in some startups.
Right.
Is really probably a much more logical strategy.
I don't disagree.
You don't get the joy of working in a startup, though, which is pretty fun.
That's right.
So you started a company called Frenting, and then you ended up at TaskRabbit, which are both sharing economy. companies.
I spent my first year out of business school in venture capital. And then, but I was a semiconductor guy originally.
That's backwards. And you have a patent, right?
I
did I get that
do.
right?
Yeah, I do. It's a method for testing memory buses.
Yep.
I came back from business school, worked in venture capital, kind of realized that semiconductors was not going to be an industry that was something that I could contribute meaningfully to as an investor. And then, ultimately decided that I wanted to go be on the operational front. So I looked at different industries and sat down with a buddy of mine who had this, cool idea for sharing stuff with people. And this was before sharing economy was a thing.
Right.
So we sat down and we said, hey, cool. Well, there's no reason why I have a pair of skis and you don't, and you then go buy skis when you could just borrow mine since they're the same size. So that problem still exists, but we saw that as an interesting problem to solve. So we founded Frenting. It was a portmanteau of friends and renting, and then you got involved sort of as an advisor, which is how we originally met.
Yep.
I thought it was a great idea. I think it still is a great idea. It was kind of another form of graduate school for us. We learned very quickly that ideas are great, but you have to be able to execute to them. You have to be able to build a business off of them, and that's a really tough idea to build a business.
Well, and it's interesting too how having an idea, and you can execute it really well, but sort of getting the idea just turned at the perfect angle. Like with the car sharing, Uber's become pretty big. And everybody roughly had this idea, or a lot of people knew, like, the average car is used 2% of the time. And so it was pretty obvious to a lot of people, like, we really shouldn't need that many cars.
Just a broad theme of asset utilization.
Yeah. And so along comes, things like Get Around, where they're like, so people should share their cars. But that wasn't the right idea.
Right.
But it was exactly the right idea. It's just one group of people should drive around and make money and charge it. And that was Uber.
You just need to fit into an existing mental model and solve a real pain point. The Get Around and relay rides model of, hey, I can now rent a car and move things around was more trying to solve the problem of access to a car, whereas Uber was it's sort of the selling the drill versus selling the hole.
Yeah.
They just said, you want to get from point A to point B in the fastest, most efficient, cost-effective way. You don't need to do that by renting someone else's car. You need to do that by getting in the backseat of somebody else's car.
Yeah, so people didn't really want cars. They wanted rides.
They wanted rides.
But it's so funny, but for just tweaking that idea a little bit. And so, and even Uber themselves, like some people who didn't invest in Uber, I think early on the founders weren't even going to be the CEO. Like even they weren't thinking it was going to be as big as it was.
Yeah. So with the Frenting idea, the company that I think is really going to make that work is Omni. And they're masquerading as a storage company.
What is Omni?
Omni is basically trying to, the public storage unit that's a block from here, that big public storage, the real estate costs a lot of money, and they're just printing money because I'm storing a bed that, hopefully one day I can put into an extra bedroom.
Right.
And I'm ostensibly spending more per square foot there than I could if I just threw the bed away and bought a new one.
And your bed doesn't require a lot of heating and air conditioning.
Exactly.
Probably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, there's that same... there's public storage real estate in Stockton that's far less expensive than here. And so Omni is more like bite-sized storage where you can, with an app sort of request people to come pick up your stuff, and then they optimize storage. It's in the most cost-effective way possible so that you're paying the most cost-effective rate. But here's the thing. Now they have your inventory. And when they have your bike and they have your skis, it's relatively easy for them to say, hey, do you want to rent it out?
Oh, that's really interesting.
And monetize it. That was always the problem with Frenting, was getting your stuff.
Yeah.
Because what's the getting out of bed problem? Well, hey, your neighbor wants to borrow your drill.
Yeah.
Do I really want to get out of bed to give him the drill? And how much am I going to make off of it? $5? And honestly, if I know you, I'm not going to charge you for it anyway.
Yeah.
But if somebody else is managing all the risk and managing all the logistics, I'm more than happy to just hit a button and make some money.
To me, that was always the sharing your car problem, was like just the handing off the keys, someone else gets your car in a wreck. Like that whole set of stuff to me was just such a mental burden.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that people say about things like Frenting, and TaskRabbit's doing very well as far as I know, but that it was so easy for people to understand what Uber does in a way that it wasn't as easy for people to understand what you might do with a Frenting or a TaskRabbit because you had so much choice.
Right. That trend, that was kind of the common wisdom that came out of the first wave of sharing economies like TaskRabbit, that, it was all about focus. You had to stand for one thing. You had to do one thing really well. And I believed that as well. And to a certain extent, I think that is still true. That gets you to that first level of scale. But I don't think that's really at the core of what's going to build a really large company. I actually think cost is the issue. So Uber has scaled immensely well because they can get you from point A to point B, not only reliably, but they can do it more cost effectively than cab companies can.
Yeah.
You know, Instacart solved a really awesome problem for us rich people.
Right.
I use that term loosely.
Right.
But, you know, is someone, and I've become acutely connected with the middle America, middle income, low medium income family. Nobody in that demographic is going to pay a premium to have their groceries delivered. Those people will pay to have Uber drive them around because it's cheaper than any other method of transportation other than maybe public transportation, which they'll
I think that to me, somebody said to me recently that the way is kind of clever, that for certain tasks, there's not enough income disparity to make it work. So there's not enough income disparity to get somebody in the U.S. to do your dishes.
Right.
In the Philippines, maybe where you're getting paid because you're an expat and it could literally cost you 50 cents an hour to get your dishes. Well, that's the right number, but something like that, you might do it. But there's just not enough delta there. You're like, I can do my own dishes.
I think that's right.
But when you look at a car, you're like, no, I can't actually drive and pay for parking and find parking and do all that for $6.
That's right.
That Uber's going to charge me. So the despair and the driver's like, I'm going to make $50,000, $80,000 a year driving. Like, it just all works.
Ostensibly, right? I think there's some pushback happening now, but but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
I think what Uber did really well was say there's an existing industry that's too expensive and delivers poor service, so we're going to do that better. And those two things together make it infinitely scalable. I think what TaskRabbit has going for it, even though it's I think they still suffer from the issue of what do I use it for? That's becoming less of an issue as they start guiding people through their flow. You know, they are taking existing industries with existing needs. Like, I need people to move me from point A to point B. I need handymen. I mean, this is what the Yellow Pages was built on.
Yeah, right.
And so they're basically becoming a quality controlled version of the Yellow Pages. That's an incredibly scalable, and that's an incredibly good idea. And you see companies like Thumbtack having done this.
Yeah.
And there was an old version of this, like Service Magic, that built a really big business on this. So that is an established, successful trend, and I think that they've got legs on it. But again, like, you look at TaskRabbit, and through the lens of the VC, I think you would sort of claim that they haven't been successful. Yet through the lens of anybody else who's looking at income statements and balance sheets, I would claim the opposite.
Well, and I think that if you just broadly categorize them with Uber, and they're not quite Uber, it's like, well, neither is American Airlines, Chrysler, any company except for 50 like the Fortune 500.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, let's get to Remedy Labs.
Yeah,
healthcare. Yeah. I hear it's a fairly simple topic, pretty straightforward. So if you could just
really
explain
fun.
it.
As I've started meeting other CEOs in healthcare, all of them, this is their first venture in healthcare. They've all come from other industries.
Right.
And I think that's because anybody with healthcare experience shies away, like says, no way in hell am I going to start a healthcare company because it's impossible. So you need, I think, sort of this entrepreneurial excitement and sort of not unawareness of the problems that you're going to hit in order to actually pull the trigger on this. And I had no healthcare expertise on this. I have friends that have started companies in healthcare who had no healthcare expertise in this. And you look at some of the successful ones, and all of these guys, not a single person comes from a healthcare company background.
Right.
So I think there's an innovation mentality that you can bring to the table. That's not to say that Remedy has no healthcare background. At this point, we're all experts in what we do.
Yeah.
And even at the beginning, the person who came up with this idea is my co-founder, Maria Ringwelski. She's been in healthcare her whole career. She started as a nuclear medicine technologist before doing her master's of public health at Columbia, got into public policy, worked in private industry, worked in consulting for pharmaceutical pricing and market access programs. So she saw cost as it affected individuals for years. And saw that medical bills were a really big problem. And I'm glossing over a lot of the story, but that's fundamentally the onus of the company.
It seems like an industry. It's such a great industry to have entrepreneurship in. You never see it because it's kind of true. Like you get the guys come to Silicon Valley and they're 26 and they don't have healthcare problems. They have sorting their music library problems and finding band problems and getting food delivered problems.
Man, that is so true. No, everyone's getting older. And even if you're young, you've got your season pass to squaw, you break your leg and you have really just catastrophic insurance with the $6,000 out-of-pocket max. And now suddenly you feel that pain very acutely.
It's a crazy... one of the things the industry seems very susceptible to is the sort of like, it's $1 trillion industry. But then people kind of lose track that it's, that $1 trillion, but that money goes to doctors and it goes to drugs. So I remember, for example, in the 80s, there was a big trend toward PPMCs, physician practice management companies, where the idea was you'd get all the primary care providers together in these big companies, and then you'd cut the costs. And I think what they realized is, the costs that the only thing they could cut, they couldn't pay the doctors less. And so they had the one person who was managing the office, but she wasn't very expensive and did a really good job. And so that whole thing kind of fell apart.
Yeah, you're starting to see that happen again with the whole accountable care organization movement, ACOs. But there's a trend that's attached to this. It's not just, hey, we're going to get doctors together and pay them and bring costs down. It actually is a function of the industry moving from fee for service to fee for outcome. And it's basically trying to get doctors to absorb more of the risk associated with the services they deliver. Because the current incentive in fee for service is you come in the door as a patient, I'm going to do as much as I can with you to monetize you.
Yeah.
So maybe I don't need to give you this drug explicitly, but hey, it might help you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get paid $18,000 for it. So let's do it. Versus accountable care organizations or fee for value, it's much more about I'm going to get paid something that looks more like a fixed amount from an insurance company.
Yeah.
And it's my job to improve your outcome.
Yeah.
Make sure that I'm not, my incentives are now tied to your health.
The numbers seem so disconnected. I had a surgery last year. It was like a allergy-related nasal surgery. So I'm fine. But it was like a 5-hour surgery at UCSF. And the bill shows up and it's like $75,000, then like minus $60,000 that goes to nobody. We were just kidding, like that, just like negotiated. And then this insurance company and that insurance company and me at the bottom. And I was like, holy crap. Like, and my part was not zero. It was several $1,000s. And they did a great job. But I was like, that's insane. Like
that $75,000 exists as sort of a red herring, artificially high amount, because they know that any insurance company is going to come in, and part of the way insurance companies make money, it's not just I'm going to take a premium. I'm going to take a markup on the premiums I get, but it's also reducing the cost of healthcare delivery. Right. And so they contract with doctors and they say, well, I for this procedure or for these types of procedures, I'm going to pay you this amount or some discount off your, publicly published rate. But same with hotels, right? You go to a hotel and you see the plaque on the wall that says this room costs $1,000 a night. Like I paid $50. Right. So and they do that basically so that they have leeway to negotiate.
Is there some guy who pays the 70, like some Saudi prince who rolls up and just, I'll pay your $75,000?
So historically, that's if you didn't have insurance, that's what you got the bill for. Now, increasingly, doctors have cash pay versus insurance pay amounts, but it's kind of a workaround of the system.
Yeah.
You can generally get a discount. One of the things we do is we help our members negotiate discounts if they're uninsured, or even if they are insured and they have several $1,000s.
So what is the remedy story? Like I know, but we should walk through it. So it's actually I don't understand. It's one of those ones where you hear it, you're like, doesn't that exist? Or like, why doesn't that exist?
Why doesn't it exist?
What's going,
right? There's good reasons why it doesn't exist. So the fundamental problem is that I could stand in a crowded room and I can ask people how many people here have been shocked by a medical bill, and 80 to 90% of people will raise their hands. And when you're shocked by a medical bill, highly likely it's wrong. The problem of medical billing errors is something that almost everyone has felt, whether or not they realized it or not. And for people in San Francisco, maybe it's an angering inconvenience, and for people that don't have our level of income that that are a little bit less resilient, that drives people into financial hardship and potentially bankruptcy. Medical debt is the number one cause of bankruptcy in this country. It's the number one form of debt in collections.
That is insane. Would 9 out of 10 people in a room know that? Like, that just seems insane that's what causes bankruptcy.
Yeah, and the Fed does studies on financial health for Americans, and healthcare is always top of the list that are of things that prevent people from living healthy lives. 40% of low medium income families will refuse to go to the doctor because they're afraid of the financial implications of it.
Wow.
And so it's this vicious cycle. You have fear of the financial consequences. I don't go to the doctor to get preventative care. That leads to acute chronic problems, which then increase costs overall, which now either drives me to bankruptcy or puts me onto government assistance programs, and that costs us all more money.
Right.
But the amount of money that changes hands in healthcare is $3.5 trillion every year. A full trillion of that is paid by us, paid by individuals, and that's more than the federal government. That's more than private insurers. That's more than any other contingent.
Really?
And that's when people say, "Oh, well, insurers are covering healthcare, or people aren't paying for healthcare." Like, that is just patently false.
Yeah.
You talk to anyone with any family, anybody with kids, anybody with a chronic condition, and they'll find it very insulting when you tell them they're not paying for their healthcare. That's
what happened to me. Like, I had insurance. So here's how I chose my insurance. We have 3 plans. I just picked the most expensive one because my employer pays for it. Right. Now, I happen to be my employer, but like, I didn't analyze it. I'm like, well, that's the gold one. I'm going to take the gold one. And so then when I got the 75, I got billed, like, personally, like, you go $2,000, but they didn't, which is a lot of money. But they didn't just do that. Then they, like, for the next 2 months, every 2 weeks, they do a new accounting. And they'd be like, oh, and $900 more.
Right.
And they do another, and I'd be like, shit, that's a lot of money. And then they'd be like, and $375 more. So I ended up paying like $4,000 delivered in excruciating piles of paper over multiple months. It sucked. And I had a good experience. I'm a better person for the surgery. They did a great job, but wow.
Healthcare services themselves are amazing in this country.
Yeah.
But, providers struggle to get reimbursed by insurance companies. We have an insanely complicated medical coding system, which is the language that doctors use for diagnostics and procedures and for getting paid from insurance companies. Insurance companies are, struggling to combat rising premiums. They still have to make a dollar. So, that as costs go up and their risk pool changes, they have to increase premiums. So they're combating that trend. Providers have a hard time getting paid by insurers. Providers have a hard time collecting from patients.
Right.
A dollar in accounts receivable for a patient is really only worth 30 cents.
Right.
Because it's really hard to collect from individuals.
Yeah. Well, in healthcare, you have to kind of remember it's delivered one at a time. Mm-hmm. Like a $1 trillion industry, but it's one doctor, one patient. And so the issue around the coding issue, as I understand it, is sort of like, it's not that easy.
Right.
Somebody comes in with, well, what is it? A broken arm, a fractured tibia, fracture on the, there's 1,000 things.
You can code a cardiac angioplasty 90 different ways.
Right.
And if you mess up one little thing, the insurance company is going to deny the claim, or potentially you'll end up, it's a accidental quote unquote upcoding, where you make a little mistake or you tweak what really happened just a little bit so you can get paid a little bit more by the insurance company. In this realm of high deductibles that we all have right now, what that effectively does is it charges us.
Yeah.
I heard an interesting way of how it was put yesterday at the Rock Health CEO Summit, that in a world of high deductibles, everything is effectively private pay. Unless you hit your $6,000 out of pocket max.
Right.
A surgery or an ER visit that costs $4,000. that's not going to be paid by the insurance company.
Right.
It's going to be paid by you.
Well, that's what kind of blew me away. My one-day $75,000 surgery. What the? There's people who go to the hospital for a month because something's really wrong with them. Like, what's
millions of dollars get spent on that?
Insane.
Yeah.
So how does Remedy come into this mix, and like, how does it come to be that you guys go?
We came at this problem just straight up as can we take expertise, very much like a TaskRabbit? Can you take expertise from people who know the system, who know how to spot errors, and bring them to the table to help individuals that have these problems? Right. And in the world where we initially launched our product, where it was snap a photo of your bill and text it to us, people were self-selecting high dollar value bills. The error rate was insanely high. Sort of 80% of bills that we saw had errors in them. And these medical billing specialists were really able to get to the bottom of it very quickly. And so we wanted to build a business based on that. What we ultimately realized, though, is it's not just the bills that you're self-selecting, it's bills across the board. Right. We were getting billing records for, multiple years from providers. And we were finding errors in bills that hadn't been submitted to us and getting money back for our members.
So the basic value proposition for one of your customers is I send you my paper, like I guess I scan it and send it to you.
Yeah, it's a couple different ways. We try and make it as electronic as possible. You can still snap a photo of your itemized bill and text it to us, or through a mobile web interface. The fundamental way the fundamental value proposition is we want to take care of as much of this for you as possible. We want to help you identify errors that you may not have even known. You probably didn't even know to look for across the board. And that's the value proposition. That we never wanted to be a pure patient advocate where you come to us with one problem and we're going to help you solve this one problem. We saw the problem as more systemic. Right. If you look at insurance company payers and doctors, providers, they have billions of dollars worth of companies that act as quote unquote payment integrity providers or revenue cycle managers that do this for them. But there is nobody that protects the patient from these errors. And so all of the fallout from that back and forth between providers and payers ends up hitting us, the patient, and there's nobody who's looking out for us.
That's an amazing, it just seems like an amazing value proposition. Like, just don't really do much work.
Right.
And get money. Right. At the end of the day, I get money back.
And I don't want to set the expectation that it's don't do any work. We still need you to go get records for us. But quite frankly, it's worth it for you. Right. And ultimately, we would love to build this company in a way where you really didn't have to do any work. We initially built this product to try and do this all automatically. You'd give us your login and password to your insurance portal. We'd go scrape explanations of benefits. We would go to your providers to request itemized bills. And it's such an archaic industry, and it's just structurally set up to prevent individuals from getting access to their data. Mm-hmm. So, insurance companies would have just flat out it's against their terms of service to give your login and password to a third party to do this.
Interesting.
So regardless of what I think HIPAA gives us the right to do, we weren't going to go beat, United Healthcare or Blue Cross Blue Shield of California in a legal battle on scraping explanations of benefits. Even harder is getting your records from your provider, because you have you have small private practices that everything's kept on paper, or if it's kept electronically, it's still something that takes the time away. It's an administrative burden for the individual. There's no API that allows us to pull itemized billing records yet.
Right.
And so it's a very archaic industry, and it became very expensive for us because you had to do a lot of manual follow-up. You had to do a lot of dealing with paper and fax, and we automated a good chunk of it, but we would never get away from the fact that providers are quite frankly allowed to charge you for these requests. Like, if you want an itemized bill, they can charge you for that request.
Interesting.
And so it's in the world where we're all accustomed to APIs and web services, where you can issue an API call and at most you're going to pay a nickel.
Right.
In the healthcare world, it's like every time I need an itemized bill, it's like issuing an API call that takes 60 days and costs $100.
Interesting.
You can't build an automation business based on that.
Right.
So we are now enlisting the help of our members to go request records. It's generally speaking much easier for a patient to request their own records than for a third party to request records on their behalf.
Right. And in my case with this surgery, they sent me a thing. Like, they sent me pages and pages of itemized stuff.
That's great that they sent that to you. In most cases, they don't. In most cases, what you get is basically just you came here on this date. You know, here's the doctor you saw, and here's how much we're going to bill you as a result.
Oh, wow.
It's sort of like going to a restaurant with 50 people, and then at the end of the day, at the end of the meal, just getting a receipt with a single number printed on it.
It feels like it works, though, in the sense of, one of the things I've learned about startups is like when you do something that's a little bit better, like nobody cares. Like for somebody to care about, if you're sort of like, I've got a slightly better events planning thing,
right,
that's a little bit cheaper, like nobody's going to switch.
Right.
But if you're like, you do almost nothing and you meet 10 women you might marry. Like, okay, like that might work.
I mean, there's no better value proposition than hit a button and money falls into your pocket.
Right. And so it seems like you've got maybe you've got to go request your records and send them in, but what you get is maybe
it's worth it.
Money.
Yeah,
like it's not like hey, we're going to evaluate your something. Like
I want to be honest, I'm not in the business of trying to go help people that. I mean, I'm happy to help anyone, but I'm not in the business of trying to help rich people recover $50.
Right.
I'm in the business of helping low, medium income families avoid bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And that sort of drove our pricing model. We don't charge a fixed fee. We don't charge a membership fee. We get paid only based on the value we create. We take 20% of every dollar that we save you, but we cap that at $99. I think what drove that decision beyond the 20%, what drove the $99 cap decision is we were seeing bills for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you're a company that comes in and says, I'm going to charge you 20%, then the best case scenario on a $100,000 bill is that you now owe us $20,000.
Right.
And that's equally unaffordable as that initial $100,000. So that doesn't really, we have a very strong ideological belief that we're in the business of helping people. We're not in the business.
How does that's not super common in Silicon Valley. Like how does that help, like in recruiting people, in talking to investors? Like, do they say you're naive, or are they like, okay, that's cool, that drives a lot of passion?
It helps immensely with recruiting, right? We're a mission-driven company. We have a strong point of view. It's easy to. It's a wonderful first pass filter. Because you find people that are in it for the money that sort of look at it and say, I'm not interested. And then you have people who are like, this is a real problem. I want to help. And I think this last election has galvanized a lot of people who are looking to really help. And so for us...
And something happened in the last election? Was it? So how does
But you can still build a big business off of it, right? I mean, I wouldn't be doing this if this were a nonprofit enterprise.
Yeah. Well, you're like the opposite of payday loans.
Yeah,
like, that's also a big business.
But you do the financial model and you look at the growth projections, and you can build a big business across the board. Like we're no longer doing this entirely manually. We've built machine learning algorithms on the back end that does a lot of the analytics, so you can do this profitably.
And what are obviously this is not a simple question, but for your business and for these people, the implications of the healthcare bills that are wending their way through our Congress, which I think generally say we're going to shift away from the Affordable Care Act. Does that impact this, or is it?
Any change in regulation, in systems, in any structural change to the industry creates chaos, and any chaos will create confusion, and any confusion will contribute to problems. So unfortunately, our business does really well when change occurs. Mm-hmm. You're going to see people lose coverage. Whether or not that's voluntary or not is kind of up for debate. But regardless, if you have less coverage, you're going to get hit with more medical bills. The more medical bills you get hit with, the higher the percentage that you're going to get hit with an erroneous medical bill. Right. So more people are going to start feeling this pain, and we'll be there to help.
So what happens? What's between here and being a sort of $1 billion company? Like what do you guys need to do next? Like what's?
Yeah, I'm going to take the approach of I want to stage this. Like I know this is a $1 billion opportunity, but I'm more focused on what does it take to be a $1 million company, and then a $10 million company, and then a $20 and $100 million company. And at each stage, the challenges that we face are different. And I think the challenge that we're facing right now is just awareness, sort of getting the word out that this problem exists, as well as operational efficiency,
Yeah.
right? Like I said, we're looking at everything now. The likelihood that your $20 copay bill is wrong is really low. Non-zero, but it's really low.
Yeah.
And so you can't afford to have a contract network of individuals look at everything.
Right.
And so we built some good IP around automated analytics. And that's going to help our fulfillment engine grow. Right. It sort of puts a force multiplier on top of our contract network. But it's operational fulfillment and it's awareness and
how do you deal? I mean, it seems to me, I've had this in several companies where I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is a good product. Like, I'm not just kidding myself, maybe I'm kidding myself, but I'm pretty sure it's a good product. Everybody who comes in contact with the product and knows about it, loves it and uses it.
Right.
How do I get it to more people? Like, how are you guys approaching this?
So it all comes back to, the strong point of view point. Mm-hmm. We take a very strong message to the public that they're being taken advantage of. Not willfully, nobody's trying to screw them over, but for whatever reason, complexity, abdication, all of these things, they're ending up with lots of medical bills that they shouldn't be paying. Yeah. You take that story and you just put it in front of people and they understand it. It's not I've got to pay for performance marketing and compete on a cost per click basis with other people, because if you look at who we would be competing against if we were doing Google ads, it's the debt relief people and it's the credit repair services, and they're spending hundreds of dollars per acquisition, and I can't compete on that as a seed stage startup. Right. So I'm relying on basically the strength of our brand and our message, and that works actually really well. Like we have good stories from our members, we have good desire from press outlets to get the word out. So that's been helpful.
Well, I'll ask you kind of one last thing. It seems to me like it's just an amazing story, and it does fall into the why.
Why doesn't this exist?
Why isn't there one of them already? Yeah. How are the investors kind of treating you in Silicon Valley? Are they like, oh, healthcare, I'm avoiding it, or holy crap, this is,
So now that our business has gotten more intricate and there's a stronger integration with the existing ecosystem, we're now starting to work with payers. We've sort of realized that we've gone from a world where, hey, we believe in you and we believe in the vision, to you now understand. No, they look at us and they say, you guys understand a lot more about this industry and you're being more thoughtful about building a business here, but you're doing it in a way that I now have no familiarity with. Mm-hmm. So even the self-proclaimed healthcare-focused venture capitalists have not been exposed to the world that we're going after now. Yeah. And so it's a little harder to get people to sign up and say, yeah, no, I'm in. I want to make this happen. Yeah. So we're out raising an additional seed round right now, and it's been a little bit slow going just because people don't understand. There's a strong lack of familiarity with what we're doing.
Well, it's that's kind of such a VC hubris thing too. It's like not like they understood Snapchat.
No, but it's different. When we were pure direct to consumer, that's an existing mental model that a lot of investors here have. Like, oh, you're going after consumers. This is a strong value proposition. I have faith that you can do this in the back end. Because there's now a B2B component to what we're doing, that changes the equation. And so it's a different investor base. And those investors have a different tolerance for willingness to invest in industries that they're not familiar with.
It's such a tricky stage for a company when you're like, when you got nothing, like, we're going to take over the world. Amazing. I'm an amazing guy, $1 billion. And then, when you're just making a little bit of money and have a little bit of something going on, then people have got something to look at and measure and multiply by. And it's almost better to be like, either be there, like be generating revenue and moving along, or not be there. Sometimes just having a little bit of revenue and a little bit of traction is like the toughest place. Right. It's such an amazing thing. Of course, there'll be investors all over the place, but it's an interesting phase.
See, I mean, the explosion in seed capital has done wonderful things for people with good ideas, but it's done awful things for taking those ideas to Series A. Yep. I forget what stat I heard, and I'm just basically quoting one other guy who told me this, but I'd believe it, that the average Series A valuations have gone from, the pre-money went from $6 million to $16 million over the course of the last 10 years. Yep. Because there's the top of the funnel in all of the seed stage startups is so wide and so full of companies that they can cherry pick the best of the bunch.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've made your way out of that.
Yeah. I'm trying. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've done this thing.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing the story. This is just fantastic.
I'm always happy to come and chat with you.
All right. Say your last name so I can get this right.
Echevarria.
Oh my God. And Victor. And
Echevarria, if you're going to say it in Spanish.
That's good. And how do people? That seems to be a theme on my Spanish. Antonio Garcia Martinez.
There you go.
Cuban. And how do people get in touch with you if they want on Twitter?
So we're tryremedy.com, TRY remedy.com. That's our Twitter handle as well. Come check us out. I'm Victor at Try Remedy. If you ever want to get in touch with me over email, we're in the business of helping as many people as possible. So
all right. Well, thank you very much. This has been the Something Special podcast. Talk to you next time.